My name is Ian Spanier and we're at the Westcott soundstage today. We're going to create a fairly simple 3-light setup, enigmatic of the kind of work that I would do maybe for a lookbook or maybe a little bit more fashion-y look if I was to get that kind of an assignment. It's going to create a bold style of lighting that I think really will impress your clients. For today's setup, I'm choosing to use the rapid box strips with 2 pieces of diffusion and a grid. What I'm trying to do is create a quality of light that really enhances my subject against a very dark background being black. The narrow beam of light that's created with this modification really helps to separate my subject from the background. Of course, I could use umbrellas or just use the heads with reflectors, but the importance to me of having the right quality of light when it comes to highlights really supersedes over anything else, and I really want to have a quality that really kind of tells the story as a whole. For my key light today, I'm using the 24-inch Rapid Box Beauty Dish. I choose the silver versus the white just for my personal preference. I always like my images to have a little bit of pop with them, which I combine generally with diffusion so that it's soft but still has some pop. The other options that are available with the Beauty Dish are grid or no grid or just wide open. I like having that versatility, and because of that, the Rapid Box Beauty Dish is pretty much in my bag on every shoot, just in case, if I'm not using it as the main light. I'm combining all of this with the FJ400 Strobes, which are portable monoblocks, and the reason I tend to lean towards portable power and portable lights is I don't like wires. I prefer to shoot without wires. If I don't have to plug in, it just kind of allows for a lot more freedom. The fast recycle time on these heads is really impressive, and it allows me to not really have to slow my model down. So if it's somebody that moves really well, they have a lot of freedom to keep moving and I can just shoot. All right, so what I'm doing now is just making sure that the highlights are going to be hitting my subject sort of crisscross on the spine. So I'll check from his spot with my back to camera, and I'm going to be looking at the 2 highlights, which in this case are the 1x3 switch grids and the rapid boxes with both pieces of diffusion on it. So we get kind of a soft highlight, but at the same time it's very directional by the grid. And I'm looking at the background kit and making sure that everything is pretty much in a triangulation to my subject. And I just make little tiny adjustments just to make sure that it's as close as possible to perfect. Everybody's face is kind of different on one side versus the other, so you kind of have to take that into account as well. Okay, that looks pretty good though. The other thing I'll say is that I read the lights individually. So even though they're set to the same power, this is channel B, this is channel C, and my key light is channel A, and I'm going to read each one individually. Then I turn them both on at the same time and read them together to make sure that they are set to an equal power so that my highlights are even on both sides. I'm looking at a few different things. One, I'm looking at the histogram to make sure that my exposure looks good. I can judge it just off the screen and I can judge it off the camera, but that's never going to be exactly perfect. So I do like to look at the technical aspect of the histogram and make sure I'm in a good space. Now, when shooting on black or on white, any extreme like that, you have to take that into account. So even though ideally for me my histogram would be juxtaposed to the right, in the case of this, there's so much black in the frame with the background that you have to know that it's going to juxtapose to the left. So as long as I see a decent amount of information going across the histogram, I feel pretty comfortable. There's no pure white, so I know that I'm not completely blown out. However, I often talk about the aspect of feel being as important as the technical part. So I'm going to check into those highlights and make sure that there is some information happening within there. So in my opinion, these highlights are a little bit too much. Now I read them with the light meter correctly, but this is where feel takes over technical. So I'm actually going to turn them down because I think the feeling of them being down a little bit more is going to be better for me than the actual number being correct. I'm going to go down a half stop on each of them. Okay, let's do one more test here. good, Sam. Great. All right, we're getting better. I could probably go down maybe another 3/10. So you are starting to see some information in the highlight, and that's what ideally I'm looking for with that kind of a lighting scenario, where it is a distinct highlight. However, you still get a little bit of shadowing and other texture in there so that you know that your exposure is not completely blown out white. So we're going down another 3/10 on each of those. And so here is where I probably would re-meter, just so for my notebook I would have the correct numbers, and that way if I ever need to reset this set, then I know that I can do it. And again, it's because I've changed it based on feel over the technical number. Okay, one more test here, Sam. Great. Okay, good. All right, much better. So I am seeing a little bit more detail within the highlight, which is what I want. Obviously, the intent is not to blow these up, you know, and crop in, if otherwise I'd be shooting tighter in. So I don't mind it being a little bit white in those areas. So as long as there's some white as well as some texture in there, I'm pretty happy with that exposure. I'll look at the close as well just to make sure that nothing is too crazy, but again, we've got some nice detail within the highlight, so I'm pretty comfortable there. So my guess is that exposure went, originally it was at 5, 6.5. It's probably down to 4.5 now that I've come down as much as I've come down on it, but I'm comfortable with all that. The other consideration I'll make here would probably be whether a grid makes more sense on the key light to really focus in that light on his face and upper body and let it drop off a little bit more naturally. That's going to be a judgment call, whether we like it better with or without the grid. So let's go ahead and add the grid. Now, whenever I'm doing a grid, I'll add in the height back to where it was, but I'm also going to check behind my model and make sure that my light's hitting where it should be. Now, right now, it's about here. So I'm looking at the center of the light and seeing that it's not hitting him in the face where I want it to. I want it to hit just between the eyes, right at the bridge of the nose. So I'm going to make that little adjustment just to make sure. And I like to check behind the model to make sure that that's hitting in the right spot that way. Okay, I can go a little bit higher and then we're good to go. Now, if your model's standing in a spot where you can't get behind them, that's a case where I'll work with the model and ask them, does that light look like it's hitting you right about here? Okay, Sam, let's take a look at that. We're going to probably have to increase that exposure because of the grid. So I'm going to come up a little bit there for that. Okay, good. All right, so to me, for my personal taste, I like the grid better. It focuses the light. You can see here, our light's spilling down. There's nothing wrong with that, so really that's where it comes down to. I like to say the analogy is like cooking. It's like salt and pepper. So for me, that little drop off that grid provides adds that little punch that I like. I feel like it makes the skin tone look even better on his face. Where you focus that light, kind of creates a little bit of a spotlight on his face, which is more akin to my style, I think. You can see also it deepens that shadow under his chin, which in this case I think I liked just for the drama. A lot of times when I'm doing a lighting setup like this, I'll shoot frames where I can individually see the lights and then see together what the two highlights are doing, just to make sure that I feel that everything is lit evenly and where I want it to be. So this is our final lighting scenario here, but this will show you what it looks like individually and then together. So this is our highlight to camera right, our highlight to camera left. This is just our key light, and this is just our highlights. This is a real important one. I always explain to photographers that they should light from the back to the front. And so working from the back to the front, I always check my backlights at the beginning to make sure that my highlights are nice and even, that they're firing in a position that I want them to fire, and then almost more important, that the feel of it is really exactly what I want. Earlier today, when I was setting this up, I had the highlights a little bit closer to my subject, and it was wrapping around his face a little bit too much. So I backed them up in order to get the feel correct. And that's more about aesthetics than anything else. And I'm not going off of what might be correct or not correct. It's really just what feels right to me. Everybody's face shape is different. Everybody's body shape is different. So you have to be a little bit flexible when it comes to putting highlights in like this. All right, Sam, so we're ready to go. We like where everything looks. Within this space, you can kind of move around as you want. These flags are here just to block the highlights from hitting the camera and getting flare on the camera. That's why I've got them there. So within this space, as long as you can kind of stay centered to that light, the light's going to be good.